We're on. I'll mute mine and let you go for it.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nandi Segbedzi. I'm the Company Secretary of ARTFA and also a member of ASMBC, which is the Australian Solo Mothers by Choice group. And I'm going to be the moderator and host of this evening. What I want to do is start by acknowledging or having an acknowledgement of country. And I will begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I am speaking to you tonight, which is the land of the Woiwurrung people of the Wurundjeri Nation. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters and the community that we are meeting on today. So I will extend also my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be present and joining us this evening. Now, in terms of housekeeping, as I say, I'm the presenter, I am the moderator, and I'm also a person with lived experience of donor conception, having undergone IVF to have my son. Tonight, we're actually very lucky. What we have is a lot of people here who have lived experience from many different angles of the assisted reproductive treatment and donor conception experience or journey. And they are going to contribute that lived experience tonight for your benefit and your information. And, we were going to also have a donor conception registrar from Victoria, but she's had to step out. And I actually think that that's better because I think we can have a really frank discussion from the perspectives that we're all coming from rather than from an official or authoritative perspective. So tonight, in terms of a sort of a disclaimer, these are all personal opinions based on personal experience and people are speaking, their truths. If you require advice, of course, we would refer you back to your professionals who will assist you, psychologists, counsellors, your IVF providers, if you have a question about those issues, because everyone is only speaking about their experience of these things. So tonight is aimed to provide you with insight. And I'm expecting to get some insight because there are some people tonight whose perspectives I haven't heard from before. In terms of housekeeping, this session is being recorded. If you're not comfortable with that, you might need to step out. We have a Q&A box to ask questions, which will be moderated by the lovely Michelle Galea. And what we'd like to do is have a sort of a respectful, safe and inclusive discussion of the issues around donor registrars and, really get people's input, insight, and then help you perhaps to understand the context in which you might be seeking to contact or, link up with your donors or your recipients and what might happen in terms of the mediation by the registrar. So what I will also do is just speak very briefly about our organisation. I'm very proud of myself because I helped set it up. So we're called ARTFA, which is the Assisted Reproductive Treatment Families Australia. And it is really soon to be, a registered charity with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. We have objects which are essentially to assist and to promote the safety, health and well-being of people who are attempting to become parents by means of assisted reproductive treatment, to support their children that are born by means of ART, and also their families. So really trying to sort of capture everybody who might be affected by ART. We want to help members of our community. We want to protect and advocate for their human rights and their safety. And we want to also increase the Australian public's knowledge of ART families and, help them to accept and respect us and respect the choices that we've made to form our families in this way. We're also seeking to advocate to government and, to help promote changes that will assist our community and oppose changes that take away from our rights and our dignity. So we set this organisation up at the end of last year, having gone through the experience of trying to oppose a change in Victorian legislation and feeling like we weren't seen. So that's really what prompted ARTFA. It is wider than, for example, my own personal experience. It is an organisation that hopes to welcome under the umbrella of ARTFA donors, surrogates, also donor-conceived people who might have come from a family that isn't like mine, that might have come from a heterosexual couple. To really try and bring us together when it's necessary and allow us to act in concert and maximise our power, particularly with regard to government legislation and government changes. So that is what ARTFA does. And the way in which this seminar came about was essentially that Michelle was approached by a consultant from an organisation that had been hired by the New South Wales government, New South Wales Health. And essentially they had a survey which they were attempting to get people to fill in, and they had no uptake. And when Michelle looked at the survey, she thought, oh, this is interesting, because the New South Wales government appear to be asking people what kind of donor linking registrar they would like, as opposed to our experience last year where a model was sort of presented to us in great haste and we were expected to respond to it in really short timeframes. So we thought, oh, this is lovely, because this is how we would have liked to have been approached last time. And we wanted to encourage both New South Wales people who will be subject to this registrar, but also Victorians and everyone from other states who have experience of their own, to maybe assist New South Wales to come up with the best system. So we thought we'll put on this seminar. We will, make the survey available for people to complete at any time. And then we'll also bring together people who can give insight, who can give their experiences of the donor registrar in their state. And then that will help people form their opinions. And not telling anyone to do anything. You don't have to fill in the survey. You don't have to answer it in the way that we would answer it, but just to give you information so that you can come at it with an informed perspective. So the purpose is to try and understand, what the New South Wales government are trying to achieve, I suppose, why it's important for us, what outcomes we want, what outcomes we think are good, and they might differ from person to person. And, at the end of it, if you feel like filling out the survey, it's relatively short. There are some things where you can write some stuff. There's also some multiple choice, I think, answers. So, it shouldn't take too long, but it's a way to think about these issues. So what I'd like to do now is to move to introducing our fabulous panel. And, some of these people are new to me, and I'm so grateful to meet them because I've heard a lot about them, and they just, everyone's experience is so interesting. So I'll lead off with Helen Miller. Helen's a psychologist, and she has previously worked in the area of fertility counselling at an IVF clinic. And, I have encountered people like Helen and had great assistance from a wonderful lady called Claire, I think her name was, when I was going through my treatment. So, yay to you, Helen. I know it must be really hard and difficult work, but we're so grateful for your contribution. Helen's now in private practice and she sees children and families, and I'm sure she has expertise in this area. So we're really grateful that she's taken the time this evening to join us. And next we have Ian Smith. So Ian is a former sperm donor. He donated in the 1980s, and he has 7 donor-conceived people who were born from his donations. He has met 2 of them, and I know Ian's name because I've seen his name against submissions and letters in all of the reviews that I, sadly as a lawyer, have looked at into assisted reproductive treatment. He's a usual suspect who really has worked in this area for such a long time and given back so much to the community in terms of understanding the issues around donors and donations. So he works with people in the donor-conceived community, which is terrific. And he supports, many people who come to him and who are impacted by donor conception. So again, very grateful to have Ian's insight tonight. Next, we have Melissa Sharman. Now, Melissa, there she is an egg donor and 3 times a surrogate. Oh, my goodness. Okay. She's also the founder of an organisation called Egg Donation Australia. And I think some of us who have faced the possible issue of needing a donor egg, people like Melissa are just wonderful at bringing people together and supporting people through that process. So thank you to Melissa for coming tonight and giving us your perspective. And next we have Katherine Dawson. So Katherine Dawson is a donor-conceived person and she is an advocate for her community. She found out who her biological father was. But in the process of doing that, she really discovered how the sort of checks and safeguards you would expect around donor identification, around the health history that's collected, around sharing that sensitive health information, they're really a little bit shoddy. The clinics are supposed to do it, and the way in which it's done maybe has some holes and some gaps in it. So this can really put the health of donor-conceived people at risk. They need accurate information, and it's already a really difficult process to go through to find out the identity of your donor, let alone then have to rely on the information provided by a stranger. So I think she's very aware of some issues that she can talk about tonight. So thank you, Katherine. I'm really glad to have you join us. And then we have Anastasia Gunn. Now, Anastasia is the mother of 3 donor-conceived boys. Oh, my God, I've got 1. I don't know how you do it with 3. She with her partner, Lexi, sorry. Now, there is a story to Anastasia's family. She intended to use the same donor for all of her boys, but they discovered by chance in 2022 that, in fact, the clinic had used the wrong donor for her younger sons. So this led to their family becoming quite fierce advocates for better regulation of the industry, the ART industry, and also around donor conception. And she is here tonight, and we're very grateful for her insights. I think she will have also another interesting perspective. So we have there, I think, almost the complete array of experiences in the donor conception community, and I'm really looking forward to bringing those to you tonight. So first of all, I think that the topic that we're going to lead off with is around exactly what is donor linking. Some of us have done it. Some of us, like me, have been very tardy, and we are yet to fill in the forms and start the process. And in any case, I'm in Victoria and there's a backlog because of the new legislation that's been brought in. So I'm not in any rush right now. So I'm very much looking forward to Helen's discussion of this and any other contributions that the panel has. I'm sure some people who've already been through this will also have some insight for us. Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, sure. So I think really just before getting started with the panel, just because this is the space where there's a lot of terminology, just so that we can get a sense of using potentially, you know, the same terminology, that might help the discussion later. So I'm sure we'll get into more detail as the sort of questions get discussed. Donor linking, broadly speaking, is the process by which people genetically related through donor conception come in contact with each other. So, you know, the two main groups there are the donor of the sperm or the egg, or, you know, donors of embryos, and then the donor conceived person. And then that might be via a donor conceived parent, you know, if the donor conceived person is under 18. So these are the groups of people who are seeking to find information about each other. And I guess in the full sense, you might think of donor linking as kind of having contact with these people. And it can be that, and it can lead to that, but it can also be trying to find out information about these people. So if you're, you know, a donor conceived parent and you're trying to find out, identifying information, for example, about the donor or other donor siblings, you know, that may or may not lead to having contact in future. So often in the sense of like a registry, we're referring to a formal process for applying for that information. And so there's a legislative aspect there about what information people are entitled to in the jurisdiction that they're in. But it's important to recognise that there are many other ways of being in contact with these people. And some of those may be because you used a known donor or you were a known donor, so you naturally have that contact. It could be because, you know, you've done a genetic profile through like Ancestry DNA and come in contact with other people that way who are genetically related. Could be through Facebook groups and websites and the clinic that you use, and depending on, you know, people's location, that, you know, that can depend on which clinics they use, that can depend on some of the avenues available to be linked with the donor. But in terms of, you know, the focus on the sort of more registry side of things, sometimes there's a kind of a definition of a central register, and I'm in Victoria and they have that concept here, and that is saying information that you're entitled to apply for under law is covered by the central register. And then there's other information that you can ask for on a voluntary basis, and they call that in Victoria a voluntary register. Safe to say is just that sometimes there's a specific avenue to get access. So for example, you know, in many locations, it's once the donor conceived person is 18, they have a right to identifying information, and how they would apply for that is through like a central register. But other places have an ability to apply early or to find out who donor siblings are, and then that would be on a voluntary basis. And so if you hear the term voluntary register, that's often what that's referring to, and there can be a little bit of a grey area between the two types of registry. So happy for anyone else to chime in with any other like essential information in terms of that terminology to guide the discussion. Or also corrections, just forever learning in this space.
No, I think everybody is pretty happy with that. Ian.
I'm happy with that, but I'll just throw in one thing. And we were discussing it in the group before the seminar started, that there's a lot of variation between the different states, and so the terminology that was used there, that's the Victorian one. There would be different variations, but the core of it is it's about, as Helen said, it's about making connections between people. That's what donor linking is about, in my sense, from, you know, both ends of the well, there's three ends to the spectrum, because there's the donor conceived person, there's the parent, but it's making connections. But it varies from the protocol. Procedures will vary from state to state. That was that comment. I'll shut up now.
No, always welcome. Always welcome. Thank you. So, you know, that kind of sets up a little bit of a framework. Obviously, New South Wales are looking into how they're going to make their donor registry. And, you know, they've asked a series of questions in their survey, and I don't know whether we've got their survey available, but essentially it's fairly kind of broad. And so, you know, it actually sort of requires people to answer, you know, to write an answer. And like the sorts of things are, you know, what information, services and supports are most needed for donor conceived people who are seeking information about a donor or donor offspring from the ART register, the New South Wales ART register that they're setting up. So, you know, I think that Helen has already touched on you know, the fact that donor linking can involve, you know, contact with the donor, or might involve seeking contact with donor offspring. So your child's donor siblings, for example. And, you know, the register, obviously, and the registrar who runs it, you know, they will have the information which they will, you know, give out to the right person. But there are obviously perhaps supports and services that might be around that, because the process of meeting someone who, you know, may have a great deal of significance in your life can be one which is a little bit emotionally very, I don't want to say taxing, but, you know, it can really pull up emotions perhaps that you didn't know you had, or perhaps it can, you might already be feeling those emotions, and it might, you know, help calm you down and give you some, you know, better insight into your life. So, you know, there may be some services that can support you with that very emotional journey. And, you know, those are the sorts of things that I'm hoping maybe tonight people can give some insight into in terms of their experience. And obviously the system has changed a little bit over time. So I think probably when Ian, for example, first became a donor, some of those supports might have been lacking. Some of the information might have been perhaps less thorough than desirable. And some of the services provided in terms of contact and communication, we know from history, weren't great. So people being called up, telephone call, you know, from a stranger saying, you know, you were donor conceived and your donor wishes to make contact with you, and that coming out of the blue for people, for both donor conceived people and for donors sometimes, was, you know, one of the things that in the reviews was complained about. So, you know, in Victoria, we had in place a system which involved mandatory or compulsory counselling for people who went through the donor linking process. That has now been, I don't want to say abolished. It's certainly not in the legislation, but it is being offered sometimes when the system is up and running. And, you know, that was one of the things that we as a group, the Australian Solo Mothers by Choice, resisted very strongly. We wanted the counselling to remain mandatory. It was, you know, an hour if you wanted to do the bare minimum. And usually people walked in thinking, what do I need to do this for? And walked out thinking, oh, that was actually really helpful. So, you know, those are the sorts of supports that people can think about and might like to consider, and think about whether you would want that for your child. You know, how ready are you to talk to your child about these issues? Things like counselling might help. Or you might have a kid who says, no, I'm good, mum, I can do it myself, and they don't want you to hold their hand, and they might not feel like they need the support. But, you know, it's really about being prepared for, you know, what could possibly be very emotionally, you know, moving for your family. Actually, Michelle, you might have something to say there about that and the process of going through counselling.
Yeah. When I went through counselling, I connected with a sibling of mine, not of mine, sorry, of my son's. And, you know, I just thought, yep, it's time. I had finished my family with that donor. My donor had actually withdrawn consent, so I couldn't use him anymore. So I thought, well, since that's happened, I'll reach out to see if he was open to contact and if any children were available. Because in my head, yeah, I just thought I'd reach out. So anyway, when we reached out, the counselling for my situation was quite different to most people that they go through. So with my counselling, I was told at the very first session after when I had the connection that the child in question, Amber, had a terminal illness and she would be dying in a couple of years' time. So for me, you know, the counsellors were able to help me understand that, and delivering that message is actually quite a shock because Amber was only a few years older, was only 4 years older than my son. So it was quite a shock, you know, to understand that a mother is going to lose her child. And so for me, I then just wanted to make contact as soon as possible. And yeah, the counsellors really helped with that. And then when, unfortunately, when Amber did get closer to passing away, I was able to reach out back to VADA as well for a couple of questions. Yeah, but I've actually, with the donor linking with my son, I've always used VADA's policies, best practice that they would say, you know, basically telling my son as soon as he was born, and telling him about, you know, being donor conceived, telling him he's got other siblings out there. Yeah, just so it's just not a surprise to him. I often speak to our members, and, you know, we have members who are afraid to tell their children they're donor conceived. You know, but then, you know, we're now finding out, you know, the implications of not telling your children of their conception, and, you know, and the damage that it can do. So I do truly believe the sooner you can tell your children, the better, because otherwise, when do you tell them? So if you just start organically, it's in their story, that's it. And generally, I find the children don't have an issue with it. It's the parents who have the stigma attached. So with our group ARTFA, we really want to be concentrating on that as well, trying to remove that stigma for people. You know, back in the 80s, when children were adopted, the advice that the parents were told back then was to tell their children they were adopted straight away. Unfortunately, children in the donor conceived community didn't have that. The parents didn't get that same advice, which is quite sad. And now we're seeing the problem. So we can't, you know, what's past is past, and what we can do is just learn from it and move forward and see what we can do better. You know, we're all learning, here to learn. You know, no way's the right way, I suppose, or whatever. I suppose I'm saying early telling of the child is the right way. But, you know, we're all here to learn and listen from other people. And, you know, everyone's got a point of view, and that's great, because it would be very boring if we didn't have our own personal point of views, and we can't learn if we've all got the same point of views. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it's sort of, you know, it is interesting that unfortunately Victoria took a step back from that mandatory counselling, and what they intend to do instead is to provide information, you know, in the form of a booklet, and it's looking like it might be quite a long booklet, to people who are seeking to access the Victorian Central Register. And, you know, so that's another model, I suppose. At one stage, you know, there was some suggestion that there might be a portal in terms of making contact and communicating. We're not sure whether that portal is going to be set up. They used to have a post box where they used an email at VADA, so that people could continue to contact each other. So that's another model that is possible. But, you know, those are some of the ways in which people are put into communication with each other through the central register in Victoria. So, you know, we're thinking about, okay, donor linking. It doesn't always involve a name and address these days. It usually involves maybe a name and an email. You know, have a think about what would you like to receive? How would you like to start off the communication experience? You know, do you feel comfortable giving over your email address? Because, you know, if you're like me, my email is my name. And I'm not sure how I feel about, you know, someone having my full name and an address that I am not going to discard. It's it's an address that I use all the time. So, you know, those are the kinds of things that we're trying to, you know, raise for people so that they understand the complexities of this. We're thinking about relationships that might go well through donor linking and also relationships that might go south. And so there are considerations there that, you know, you might want to take into account. So we've got, you know, a sort of a framework of a donor linking registry or a donor central registry, ART registry as it's going to be called in New South Wales. In terms of the rest of the panel, what I might do is I might ask Katherine to give us her perspective on you know, the survey questions, which I read out the question about what supports are needed for donor conceived people. And also, Katherine, I noticed that you were nodding through some of what Michelle was saying. So I would love it if you would tell us why you were not nodding and what your experience was.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I've applied through Victoria. I was conceived in Victoria, but I've got siblings potentially. Well, I know I've got siblings in South Australia, very likely in Queensland and possibly in other states as well. I'm not really sure. I'm not allowed to have that information, but I've gone through the process of applying to the voluntary register, connecting with any possible siblings that are there, and also applying to the central register in 2017 when that retrospective legislation went through. And I think the counselling is very important because they try, and I had a lot of contact with VADA even from, gosh, I would have been 23, so 2013 all the way up to 2017 I was in touch with VADA then, and sort of stayed in touch with them based on the laws are coming. The laws are going to change. We're seeing this sort of happen. It's going to happen. Just hang in there. So just establishing like relationships with people at the registers, I think, is really, really valuable, because I never would have expected that I would have applied to the register and found out that a donor with schizophrenia was my biological father, and he'd used a bunch of fake names, and then the clinics had also sent the gametes interstate, and then on Ancestry multiple siblings were showing up that were from different codes, like proving that he did use fake names, and 2 codes alone are at Monash IVF and different things like that. So I think the preparation that the counsellors sort of thought could be possible is, as maybe like a worst case scenario, was that the donor had passed away. There wasn't really preparation for he could be mentally ill or have any mental illness, or done any of the things, or been allowed to have done any of the things that he had done. So there was just there was no preparing for that. So I think though counselling, I don't know if it has to be mandatory, because like you said, Nandi, like your child might say, no, I'm fine, but there's the supports there if they're needed, because you might think it's all like you don't care when you apply, this will be fine. but you just never know who's on the other end of the application. You don't know their life at all. Like we share genetics, but we just never know what's going to be on the other end of the application. And so having that safety net of familiar people who have that experience in counselling is just really, really valuable, because it's somewhere to go to. I know that in my own sibling group, there's been siblings that have really struggled, and especially struggled when they found out on Ancestry. So I kind of don't believe that parents who aren't telling their kids, I just don't believe that they will not find out some other way, whether it's they do Ancestry, their kids do Ancestry, or eventually I see laws coming into place that are retrospective and that siblings will be able to reach out to each other. I've had the clinics have to reach out to some siblings and have reached some siblings that have parents that never wanted to tell them. So they were able to access VADA up until December, and I don't know how they're going since then. And I think it's really dangerous. Like, I have had a sibling that nearly passed, and I know there are other donor conceived people in the community this year that have passed because of maybe a lack of supports. So I think having them there is really, really important, and I would really try and urge people to advocate for having qualified and knowledgeable counsellors accessible to all members of our families, because it's really, really valuable, like life-saving. So
So as you say, maybe not mandatory, but that the counselling be there for anyone who uses the register.
Yes. And so, like, if I don't need counselling, that's more sessions for someone else who does need them, because I think there's a limit on them. But if there's situations where people really need them, then they should be able to access them.
That's a different way of putting it, and it might be just as effective. Thank you. So yeah, look, it's a really kind of interesting issue. When we spoke to, I think it was the Minister for Health in Victoria about this, and we sort of said, we really value the VATA counsellors, because that knowledge and experience is concentrated in them. They are picking up all of the people in Victoria, who need the counselling, and there weren't very many of them. There are, somewhere between 2 and 6 people who were providing that counselling at any, in any year. But that meant that they would have seen every scenario that at least was possible in Victoria, and unfortunately, someone saw Katherine's scenario. Someone would have seen Michelle's scenario, and so they were really collecting that experience together. And now, because the counselling has been handed on to a service, I think that's located in the Royal Women's Hospital, which normally does fertility counselling, those people will start from scratch with zero experience of the issues that might arise in donor conception and donor linking. So it's a real shame. We asked that, for example, whoever gets the counselling be trained by, or preferably be an ex-employee of VATA. I don't think that that's been picked up either. So it's a real shame, because that institutional knowledge is lost. Luckily, we are aware of some of those counsellors, and fabulously, we know some of them. So, in terms of the ASMBC, we are able to refer people to people that might have experience. And if they are qualified counsellors, qualified psychologists, that's terrific. But, it's tough. It's we've been left to fend for ourselves in that regard in Victoria. So we don't want that for New South Wales. Ian is putting up his hand. You're on mute, so take yourself off.
Yeah, I am putting up my hand. Just on that point of the expertise and the training of the counsellors, you're right that they're based at Royal Women's. My impression is that the Department of Health has heard those of us who've spoken up and said, look, that expertise is very specialised. You mustn't ignore that fact. they're moving slowly, but my sense is that they've got that point. They are setting up training for those counsellors, and they will draw on that marvellous expertise that was in VARTA. It's not terrific, but it's not, in my impression, quite as gloomy as you were fearing.
Well, we
maybe
will
I'm
wait
Pollyanna.
with bated breath.
Yeah, maybe I'm
And
Pollyanna.
I might be one of the first people to tell you, Ian, because as I say, I still haven't put my application in.
So it might be better than we're fearing there. So might.
Right. Okay, cross fingers that you're right. So those are some of the things that you can think about if you're doing this survey. Those are some of the experiences about what donor conceived people might feel that they need when they're approaching the New South Wales register that will be set up. And look, the next question in the survey, it's very similar in format. What are the information services and supports that are most needed for family members of donor conceived people? So that's probably people like me who are seeking information about a donor or donor offspring. And Anastasia, perhaps you might lead off and give us your insight into this. I think you might come from a very different perspective, being a parent and wanting to know about particularly health information.
Yeah, so our situation is quite complex, and if you want to read more about it, you can just Google my name. I'm very open, and we've done media. So, and part of the reason we chose to do media is to break the stigma. There's been problems for other people, and they've either self-silenced or been silenced effectively, and we kind of wanted to break that seal so that people could speak out. We did that in consultation with our children and with their consent. So people who have been concerned about whether our children have consented to that, yes, they have, which is why I put in my bio that we as a family are petitioning for change. I think that counselling, I agree quite strongly with Katherine, as always. Katherine and I are friends. So I think mandatory counselling, not necessarily. So our children range in age from 9 to 18. We have, due to the trauma of our own situation, our family has our own counselling going on, and certainly our situation is out of the norm. I would hope that the two donors, who are the biological fathers of our children, will have been offered or access counselling. I can't imagine what this situation is like for them. They know that they are the biological fathers of our children, and we have no idea what they've had access to. And I certainly hope that they've had access to counselling because they've kind of been caught up in friendly fire, is how I would describe that. I think the health issues are very important, as Michelle touched on. Two of our children have health problems, and so does some of their siblings. And I think the health issues are very important to talk through when you realise that there are multiple children from the same donor that have similar or the same health conditions. That's quite striking to find out as a parent, and it's quite striking for your children as well. That causes some very complex feelings. I would imagine that's very challenging. We're in touch with some of our sibling families, and our children are really happy for that. Some of that has come through our personal research to find those siblings, and some of that has come from media, that people have seen us on media and then reached out to us to say that we are a sibling family for your children. And our children have enjoyed having contact with their siblings that have chosen to reach out, and we hope to make more contact with those. Something I'd like to focus on in terms of this survey is I feel very strongly about DNA testing being offered to donor conceived people and to parents, and some information being offered around that. we found out incidentally through direct-to-consumer testing. We never at any point suspected actually that our boys did not share a biological father until the direct-to-consumer testing came back. I can't even describe to people what that felt like. Talking about it, my hands and feet feel cold. It was very shocking to us. I don't know that any counsellor could have prepared us for that situation. That was pretty horrendous. It's been pretty well documented in the Queensland Health Ombudsman investigation into the ART industry that there are a significant number of donor semen vials that are at high or medium risk for misidentification that have been used at a clinic in Queensland. I have seen some of the documentation about that from any donor ampules from 2020 or earlier. 99.8% of those donor semen vials are at medium or high risk for misidentification. That was noted in the Health Ombudsman investigation. I think it, just from our experience where we would never have guessed, I think the DNA testing is really important. I think you can't assume that just because you're given a donor code and a name that is the biological parent of your child. And I think Katherine can attest to the importance of that as well, where there were different codes. We know that gametes and embryos were sent interstate and that codes may be changed interstate. And I also know from people I'm in contact with of donors going to multiple clinics. And so that causes issues as well. I'm not sure how that's going to be handled by the clinics, but I really want to impress on people who think this could not have happened to me. I certainly never thought this could have happened to our family. At no point did we suspect it. And I am surprised at people's reluctance. Well, I guess not surprised because it is so incredibly traumatic. People's reluctance to DNA test who say, but my kids all look the same, or my kids all look like me, or I'm sure it was all done properly. Our family was sure it was done properly too. We were sure our children shared a father. We had zero doubts about that until the horrible truth came out. So I would really like it that there is some hesitance for some people to use direct-to-consumer DNA testing. I would like the government to provide that for people to ensure that then the information that the people are receiving is accurate. And because I am a nurse and I work in a critical care environment, a lot of medical decisions are made based on accurate medical history. And so if you actually are believing that your biological parent has one set of medical history, however the medical history is different, that may have incredibly important consequences. Yeah, I can see Katherine's putting her hand up about this issue also.
Katherine, what would you?
Yeah, I just want to agree with that, because I had in 2015 we had the RUDC conference, and I actually met a sibling in that room where she had a different code to me, was from a different state, and I didn't think that we were related at all. There was no clicking moment where I recognized someone from that I had any kind of feelings that we were related. There was none of that, because I trusted the donor code as well. And so she was the first match that popped up on the direct-to-consumer test. And then the next sibling that popped up on that DNA testing website was of a different code as well. She actually didn't know she was donor conceived, and so we ended up talking on the phone, and then she contacted VADA, and her contact with VADA was then a reason or evidence of that sibling being on a different list once they looked up her name, and then VADA offered to connect us with a DNA test, doing a NADA accredited DNA test there. So VADA did offer that when there was instances of possible crossing over with different donor codes. So I would definitely second that, because I'm not convinced that I should be trusting all of my sibling lists and trusting the information that was kept and the processes that were put in place. And that's, even for me, that's siblings up until 2003 that I know of. And then, as Anastasia said, it's ongoing. So just to be able to confirm that and know for certain is important, especially across the states. You just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real kind of problem, and hopefully we'll get time to speak about this as well, that it is, we have, 7 states and territories, and the systems are different in each. Funnily enough, the organisations, the IVF providers that are we are dealing with are often the same, but they are Monash, Melbourne, or Melbourne IVF, Brisbane, or whatever it might be. So they're actually operating nationally and in 7 different regimes. Now, as a lawyer, I know that's a real pain in the bum for that business to be operating across sort of 7 different schemes. But the danger for people's lives is that slippages between the states and systems and processes has real impacts on people. So look, it's really interesting to hear that, and I DNA testing is something that has been in TV shows for decades, and identifying information as we think about it is a name, but DNA is the best identification, isn't it? It's the thing that you can change your name, you can change your donor code, but you can't change your DNA. And so I suppose, that would be the gold standard of identifying information.
Well, and Nandi, quite frankly, they could swap donors. And so I specifically am addressing the fact that even if everything looks okay on paper and it wasn't from, let's say, Ian's period of donating, where records may have been destroyed, everything can look like it lines up okay, but the risk of misidentification in those medical records that I have seen, for it to be 99.8% of all ampules from 2020 and before, that is incredibly high. This is not ancient history where you can say this happened 40 years ago. This affects a huge amount of recipient families and their children. So I am incredibly concerned about the DNA element.
Yeah, and it's I think about it now, and I mean, I'm actually in the same situation where I've had informal contact with somebody who, we suspect that our children are donor siblings, and they look alike, which is really weird for me because I'm brown, so how on earth does my child look like somebody else's child? But some of the features are very, very similar. And we've got different codes. It seems to he seems to have donated at 2 different clinics, and I have to go through the process of going to the central register, and they will be able to confirm for me, whether or not the name that I get is the same as the name that this other lady has. And that's all I'll have. And now that I think about it, I think, actually, I'm not sure I'm going to rely on that now, now that I've heard Anastasia's story. So thank you for that. I'm definitely getting an insight tonight. All right, so the survey, again, has the same format question in relation to donors. And we have 2 donors. This is fantastic. We have Ian and Melissa, egg donor and sperm donor, and they were in discussion just before the seminar started, and they had some differences. So I'm really looking forward to it. Who would like to lead off? Melissa, take yourself off mute and fire away. Oh, it's still on mute.
Oh,
Gotcha.
So basically, I've donated since, well, I started donating back in 2008. So back then things were, particularly for egg donation, maybe a little bit less talked about. So, you know, things have, you know, changed quite a bit since then, and we're getting more and more people come to us because of, you know, more the acceptance with modern families and also advanced maternal age and things like that. So our community is built around, you know, we do champion known donation, but we do have a lot of people who, you know, both donors and intended parents or parents who have, you know, gone down the anonymous identity release, and also some purely anonymous going overseas as well. So, and in answer to this question, we have a group of 1,500 donors and surrogates in our group as well. And our group basically has been advocating for safe, ethical donation since about 2011 when we started. One thing we have sort of found, as though, you know, as society has changed and as the practices have changed, the laws really haven't kept up in Australia. So it's actually really encouraging to see some movement in a few of the states in relation to sort of setting up these services and finally following Victoria, you know, in their steps. We do know that many donor-conceived people don't know the truth about their genetic origins, and that when they're not told early or at all, the emotional harm, you know, is significant. The absence of medical history, identity confusion and trust issues have lifelong consequences. And without this knowledge, even everyday experiences like dating become complex and potentially distressing, with the risk of unknowingly connecting with a genetic relative. At the same time, like even in, you know, like known donation, as we sort of do in it primarily with Egg Donation Australia, you know, there are things can change where intentions, you know, start strong, relationships can change. So parents can withdraw, change their mind from being open, even if they intend to do so at the beginning. You know, donors and recipients may drift apart or experience conflict. You know, those relationships can change. What people want can change. And these are human realities, and we really have to plan for them, because, you know, in the past a lot has just been left to, we'll see how it goes, but we're realizing the human impact. So I actually asked a few of our donors, what do we want to see? What do we need? And they've said what's needed now. They've clear national laws and consistent standards across Australia, regularly reviewed to reflect current research and lived experience. Counselling services for all involved, donors, donor-conceived people, recipient parents and extended families, including children, partners, nieces and nephews, who one day may navigate complex genetic relationships because of the choice of the donor. So I recognise that when I chose to donate, I have actually 20 donor-conceived kiddies out there that I've actually all met. Their parents are fabulous people and I just adore them. And I made that as a very, very conscious choice. But, you know, they all play Roblox together, so it's quite a different dynamic. Back in September, I went to Sydney and met all like 12 of them in one place, and 12 you know, pre-teens in one house. I sort of wondered when the heck did this actually happen, because it was a very surreal experience for me. So we were also, a big thing that was discussed was public education campaigns to reduce stigma and promote transparency around donor conception. So, you know, even the New South Wales Register and for even the governments to provide services much like what VADA provided in Times to Tell, resources, that sort of information that changes and evolves with the research that's coming back. Support services and intermediaries that can gently facilitate connections between donors and donor-conceived people when parties are open to this. So rather than just going, here's the exchange of information, that potentially if someone feels it is needed, somebody who's professionally trained as an intermediary can support parties to have that first contact. And also safe and respectful pathways for donors and donor-conceived people to establish emotionally healthy relationships built on kindness, consent and care. The key features that we'd like to see in the New South Wales ART registry, the ability for donors to be able to update their health information regularly. I think this is a really big one. There's quite a few of our donors who, since they donated, things have become apparent in their family or in their own health, or they've been diagnosed with something, and having that information, it's great when it's known, because you can reach out and communicate that. But if you don't have that contact, it's an unknown, an unknown factor, I suppose. Access to, even your own offspring and sibling list information, so that you can update that and provide that for access for donor-conceived people as well. A mutually agreed contact process with an intermediary if needed. Consideration of potentially a notification mechanism, much like it's done in Victoria, to inform donor-conceived peoples when information about their origins is available. I know that's a very controversial topic, but I think that at some point it may, if the rights of donor-conceived people are put forward, whether that information is available to them if they want to have it, that it's, that it is there, whether it be recorded with birth, deaths, marriages, a register, or some other avenue. I think that's super important. And yeah, basically we want to work together to build a donor conception landscape that, really promotes truth and transparency. And, it's really great that New South Wales is, considering putting this in place and actually speaking to stakeholders about what that might look like. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
No, that is terrific. And I mean, you've picked up on the need for intermediaries. There really was at one stage a suggestion that it would be something like a portal where you would literally go and they would, magically, provide you with the information and then you would walk away. And it just sounded ghastly.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think it's worth considering that life does happen for people, and that sometimes it might not be the right time, or there may be other things going on and it's not the correct time to do so. There may be anxiety and stress around meeting that, and if they've got somebody who is a support person who can just take a little bit of that pressure off, I think that's definitely something that should be offered. So.
Yeah. I think a human intermediary is necessary. It cannot just be an electronic portal.
No, absolutely. Somebody ideally who has some kind of training and expertise and understands.
Yeah. Ian, now you have been involved in this for some time, and so you've been through lots of different regimes and models. Please.
I have, but I have nothing like the depth of cohort that Melissa talked of there of 1,500 egg donors. It's extraordinary. There is nothing like that I know of in terms of a collection of sperm donors. And so my observations are drawn from just the interactions that I've had with donors across the years that I've been working in this area. And it's a mix of donors from my era, the 40 years ago, the donors like me, people like Nick Lovett, who's a donor who's sort of somewhere in between that and the current quite young donors. And one of the things I observe is that there are differences across those three cohorts. I think there are also differences in the way that sperm donors and egg donors react to the circumstance, and there's research been done around this that illustrates this, and I think that comes from the fact that for egg donors, it is a much more significant thing to do. It's physically much more demanding and intrusive. It means that they think a lot more about what they're doing. In the case of sperm donors, it's not an onerous task, and the danger of that is that for young men in particular who are donating, I worry that they don't really think about what is the consequence of what they're doing. It seems really easy. They are actually creating a child. Exactly the same dynamic applied to me when I was a donor. We were told to forget about what we were doing. We were told you might not even make babies. It's different now. The donors now cannot donate anonymously, as I did. They donate knowing that in 18 years' time, somebody might come and contact them. But it's very easy, I think, for a young man to think, oh, 18 years, oh, gee, now that's a long way off. They'll just put it out of their mind. And flip that one around, when either the 18 years ticks over and a young person emerges and says, I want to speak to you, or as I know happens quite often, when a child has been born to, say, a solo mother by choice, and that mother wants to reach out to the donor before that 18-year period has elapsed. That will happen quite often. And that can be quite challenging, regardless of when if they're an old donor like me or a more recent donor. It can be quite challenging when that reality emerges. That okay, there is a child. It's actually biologically my child, and they want to have something to do with me. And that then leads to the question of, well, what sort of supports are available and ought to be available to those donors. There was talk before about counselling. I reckon counselling is really good, but I equally know that lots of people react to that word. They don't like the word counselling. So one of the things I'm going to be saying in the New South Wales survey is actually don't call it counselling if you can avoid that. Call it support. The support should be, in my view, a range of responses to the circumstance of that donor. Whatever they're going through, whatever their age, the dynamic is. I reckon the services need to be very flexible and reactive to what is needed, within an envelope, not right, we've got this service for you and we will deliver it to you, whether you like it or not, or whether it's what you want or not. So I think one of the key threads in there is and I'm guessing that probably the majority of people who are on this call are going to have donors not like me from the old era. They're going to be much younger men, and there is that dynamic that I talked about of, it's one thing, making the donation think, yeah, I'm doing a really good thing, I'm helpful, and then when it turns into reality of either a donor conceived person reaching out or their parent reaching out, that's when it can really hit that donor that, oh wow, this is actually quite complex. I might have my own family by that stage, and well, okay, how is that all going to fit together, these donor conceived children? So that's probably enough. I'll be happy to answer questions if anybody's got questions, but I think in terms of the dynamics from a sperm donor perspective, and as I said, I think the dynamics for sperm donors and egg donors, it is different, and that's really important that be recognised. I'll stop there, and we'll be happy to answer questions later if we get into question time.
Yeah, and Sarah, you have appeared and your hand is up, please.
Thanks so much, everyone. Ian, I'm just curious to hear, especially this relates back to the survey as well, about your family, and are there any supports or any services that you would say would be needed from a registry for your extended family?
Yes, I think that should be available, because it is potentially complex for the family of the donor, because there is the one or more other people who are siblings, half siblings, biologically siblings. the family members may worry, well, is this person going to take my father or my mother's attention away from me? So very definitely, I think those support services need to be there. They need to be open to the broader family. Again, on the basis that they're there, they're not forced on people. But my own very direct experience is my own circumstance. So I have 7 donor-conceived children. I've met 2 of them. I have 2 children who were from my marriage, and it is quite complex navigating between all those people. Again, the support targeted to what the needs are is really key.
Yeah,
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And the reason for that question is I think back to the adoption, back in the adoption era, where my mum had cousins who were adopted out, and now my mum in her late 60s is connecting with these biological cousins who she never knew through life. And so I kind of look at that as a solo mother by choice with a donor conceived child. There's going to be so many more layers than just the immediate family.
Exactly.
So it's great to hear from you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
There are many layers, and there is a long tail to this.
Yeah, and all of that I think needs
TIL.
to.
It will run out well into the future as these people grow and think about all those connections that might be out there and how they want to. If they want to, does the other person want to? It's potentially like throwing a pebble in a pond and it ripples
seeing the ripple.
out.
Yeah, and I think the registries need to really consider the whole picture. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. Now we have Emily's got her hand up. You might need to type the question into the Q&A. I think I'm not sure whether.
I've got it there. I've got it. There's a couple of questions that have come in.
Terrific.
One from Eloise Drummond. What changes would the panel members like to see in how clinics and registries manage and share critical health information about donors? What role would legislation play in ensuring this happens?
I think Anastasia certainly touched on some aspects of it in relation to DNA, but is there
Can I
anyone?
talk about that in 2 ways? Because I work in health as well. There has been, so in terms of DNA and health, there has been, it's been in the media that in Australia, there's actually been a situation that one of the other guests has brought up in chat with me, that a woman met and married her partner. She was donor conceived. They married and had 2 children and had a happy relationship up until the time that they did ancestry testing. She knew she was donor conceived. She was donor conceived before 2004. She had asked the clinic for the identifying information about her biological father, and the clinic said, we're not going to tell you because we don't have to. So unfortunately, that situation has ended in a consanguineous relationship between her and her half-brother, and also brought children into the situation. An incredibly tragic situation for everybody involved. So her husband's father had been a donor and not told anybody. And then the clinic had refused to release the information to her because there were no retrospective laws. I think the retrospective release is incredibly important, and that showed why. I mean, this woman asked for the information, it was refused to her, and then she married her half sibling and they had children, which I don't even know how that family is going to get over the devastation of that impact. So there's a DNA aspect of that. In terms of a health registry, I have some quite strongly held opinions about that. I think there definitely needs to be a centrally run bureau of some sort, run by a health professional. I'm a nurse, so I'm biased. I think it could be managed by a nurse. There could be some sort of portal where donors and donor-conceived people or family members could upload information or make contact with a real person, which a lot of people love the contact with a real person. I think nurses are great at that. In our case, we did report our children's medical problems to the clinic, and the clinic unilaterally decided not to pass on that information to anybody. That has happened to other families as well. So when we found out our children's siblings had very similar health problems, that was quite striking. The clinic that we used has stated in Parliamentary Committee in 2022 that they contact every donor every second year for a health update. I'm yet to see any evidence of that, and neither has anybody else seen any evidence of that. I have spoken to donors who donated through that clinic, and those donors have told me that they have never been contacted for health updates by that clinic. In a very direct way for our children, the way that they have been impacted. So our middle son has had, I don't know how much medical information people will understand of this, but our middle son has had a CAT scan of his head with contrast, which is a lot of radiation, and he's also had an MRI of his head as a child, and both times we were asked, is there any history of brain cancer in the family? And we said, no, there is not. It turns out that yes, there is. Their paternal uncle is terminally ill with brain cancer. This information has never been given to us or been given to any of the sibling families. So personally, I think it should be legislated that donors are contacted. Like Ian said, I mean, some of these men have been incredibly young when they were donors and perhaps unaware of family history. I do think a second yearly update is probably an appropriate period of time, but also space for sibling families to share medical information, because something that people might not think is necessarily medically huge information, just from a health perspective, it may make all the difference for diagnostics for somebody else in that sibling cohort. And when I talk about sibling cohorts, I'm talking about the donor's own children as well. I think those children are my children's siblings also. So I don't wish for them to be excluded from that on any level. I think they should have the information that we have about the health issues also. So I think that should be a centrally run thing where people can either send in information and it's held somewhere away from the clinics. I think this must be done by a government body that is not making a profit off it. I donate blood. I go to the Red Cross. They're not making any money off me. I'm incredibly honest with these people about what medications I'm on and what my health history is. They're incredibly good at keeping those records, keeping everything beautifully organized, because then I give blood products to patients and I'm on the other end of that where everything is rigorously checked, incredibly well tested. And I personally think that sort of setup would be what is appropriate, as a very central location with all that health information. And I mean, the NHMRC guidelines do say that health information should be shared. The problem is that this has been guidelines and these guidelines have not been adhered to. It is only when something is legislated that it is adhered to. So I would like to see it legislated. I'd like to see it legislated and put in the hands of people who it is of no value of them to hide anything, the same way it is of no value to the Red Cross to hide anything.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. So both retrospectivity and then also that it'd be a centrally held, independent, arm's length, and I think national because people move around. You know, people move around with the best will in the world. You know, registry.
Well, people don't even just move around. Gametes have been sent to multiple states.
Yeah.
I think if we ignore that fact, it is perilous.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
We really have to acknowledge that family limits have been exceeded even in recent years. Gametes and embryos have been sent interstate. I suspect there are a lot of donors that in Queensland in September, the retrospective anonymity will be dismantled at that point, and a lot of donors will be very surprised to find out how many families have been made with their gametes. The truth is starting to come out in Queensland now ahead of this registry. So yes, I think it needs incredibly important that this be national. I think it is every person's right to know to the best of their ability their family medical history. It is so incredibly important. I'm a perioperative nurse. If you have a certain kind of gene in your family and you don't know it, we could go to give you an anesthetic for a relatively minor procedure and you could die instantly. You must know these things. We don't want to hurt anybody at the hospital. We want to help people and save their lives.
That is an extra perspective that you've given us there, Anastasia. Katherine, now you've had your hand up for some time. I'm so sorry. Please speak. Now take yourself off mute.
No, that's okay.
Go
yeah, I definitely want to second the retrospectivity of this because the siblings that I have, there's 58 confirmed with a few in South Australia, and that's just 2 separate codes in Victoria. So there are a lot of people that are all, you know, between 23 and 43 that still, I know 14 siblings out of 58. So I would guess that the majority of all of the rest don't know they're donor conceived. And there's critical health information that I have for them. 2 different kinds of critical health information. One's a pre-bowel cancer condition that a geneticist has said they need to be checking from their early 20s. And there's also the donor having schizophrenia. So the clinics have said that the inheritance pattern of schizophrenia is unknown, and therefore they won't be mentioning that to any families. The inheritance pattern of the pre-bowel cancer condition is also unknown, but they've agreed to tell the families and just reach out to the old address that the parents used at the time of treatment. And I know there are kids that have donors that are 6 and under that a donor with schizophrenia has been used, and the clinic has refused to reach out to those families to warn them. They say it's just environmental factors. But if you don't know that you've got a predisposition to a mental illness, then you're not going to be monitoring your environmental factors or telling your children, do not smoke marijuana because you have this predisposition to mental illness. So it's really, really irresponsible of clinics. And in Victoria, it's section 68E that says no clinic has to tell any families any medical history. Nothing in this part requires a clinic to pass on that information. So I would say that sharing information needs to be taken away from the clinics because they have proven to be very, very irresponsible. I have a sibling that developed schizophrenia at age 10. So there is actually proof that this is a genetic factor, even in my sibling group, which they refuse to acknowledge. And that is a permanent thing in her life, and that's how it is. And so that's impacted her entire family and her life's trajectory. It's just very irresponsible of the clinics. And so what's happening in South Australia is there's a section in there that if there's critical or important genetic information, that the health minister can step in and reach out directly to the donor conceived person or their families and communicate that information. And I would strongly suggest that in the survey, if anyone values that important medical information, to be able to use that for diagnostics, that they advocate for this section to be followed in New South Wales to mimic that of South Australia. Victoria currently don't have that section. So South Australia is leading at this point in time, and I'm currently going through the process now of using that that avenue to get the health minister to step in, who was very supportive of the legislation and that section in particular as well. Obviously, like a lot of my parts of my story is quite shocking, and that was acknowledged that, you know, we had Narelle's law in Victoria with clinics may share the medical information, but may and must are very different in terms of legislation, and it's been 7 years since that legislation has passed and that we've known about this information. So my, you know, siblings' lives are on the line for that, and Victoria need to follow South Australia as well as New South Wales. But I would really, really stress that sharing of information, if it's there, if it's known, it's able to be uploaded to a portal, but also it's then communicated directly to the families to an up-to-date address. That's just crucial. And I know they have to have a threshold of what information they deem important or critical enough. I'm not sure what they would put as that threshold, and you know, all of us advocating for as much information as possible be communicated, but especially for critical or important or genetic information, that be communicated directly to the person.
That's really interesting that South Australia are ahead. You know, Victoria was leading for such a long time, and then they voluntarily decided to step back, in my view. So I'm not surprised that, you know, someone else is stepping ahead. And the thing with making legislation is you really need to try and affect it before it is made, because, you know, once they make it, amending it takes a long time. Everyone says, oh, it's just a little thing, you know, we just need to tweak it, but somehow, you know, things
South Australia
doing it.
South Australia took around 5 years, so that's what there's been lots of consultation, and you know, even the IT team in South Australia for you know, putting information into the register, it's all verified, and to make your profile on their portal, you need to use your MyGov ID. So
that's a very high level of identification, isn't it? Yeah.
Higher than what donors needed to provide to donate to make a human being. So
wow. Yeah, good. That's a good perspective. Thank you. Helen, you've got your hand up. And Emma, I can see you, and we're going to get to you, to your question, I promise.
Yeah, well, I was just going to potentially take the conversation a bit of a different direction. So I don't know if, Emma, your question related to health before I do that.
Yes, no?
Maybe
just a nod or a...
I'm not sure if everybody knows who I am, but I just want to give you a brief rundown. I manage a family tree on Ancestry using hundreds and hundreds of DNA kits, and it's got 246,244 people on it currently. These are all networked together, and what I believe the statistic is on people who do Ancestry DNA testing is that 1 in 5 will in fact find within their living memory of a person that they believe is their person is not their relative. And this is a really big problem for the donor conception area, because even if a donor was honest about their medical information and their family tree and all of these things, a $100 DNA kit proves them wrong. And there are people in the comment section on here who are people who have found that information out, and it is quite shocking. I have contact with many people between adoption, donor conception, surrogacy, all of these, and all different, like recipient parents, adoptive parents, and I've spoken to just thousands of them. And at this point, what I have seen within talking to, and I'm not a professional, I was a school teacher who recently just got made retrenched, partially because of the amount of information that I have access to and have identified people. It's very scary. This information is terrifying to institutions, and IVF institutions should be very scared because they have made mistakes. We know that they've made mistakes, and we know historically within all family trees there are so many mistakes, and there are thousands and thousands of people on Facebook groups piecing it all together. We know this because it's all coming together with those DNA kits, and it's not going to end. So the anonymity was always going to be over. and the transparency will rule. How we get to that worries me immensely, because we were talking about something very specific before, and it was edited out of a podcast I previously did with Sarah Jefford in 2020 or 2021. The incest cases. I manage 8 DNA kits where incest occurs, and it's very, very scary. Some people know, some people are aware, and some people immediately can see it in the DNA kits. And this is all being managed by random people in Facebook groups with varying degrees of qualifications. And I worry so much about this because I have researched for adoptees, and one of the adoptees I researched for, in fact, committed suicide. And that is a very common occurrence when people are distressed. We know this. So I've done my best to try and educate myself about mental health and trauma and how to navigate these things, but it hasn't been without issues whilst doing all of this research for people. I am contacted on a weekly basis by probably about 5 people a week that are looking for answers, and they range from donor conception and adoption. These two things are incredibly overlapping, as well as surrogacy. So between the thousands of people that I've had contact with, I urge everyone to understand that transparency is coming. I need it to come in the kindest possible way. So I just wanted to make sure that it is known that this is happening on Facebook groups.
Yeah.
Just the same as I met Melissa on a Facebook group, and she helped me through a crisis. She might not even remember me. Yeah, she called me while I was in the bathtub having a panic attack about a situation that was going down. So like these are thousands of random people who care very much about each other, having never met each other, on Facebook groups, trying to talk each other down and to help and assist in varying circumstances. And I'm sure Ian, I've met him on an occasion, and I know Anastasia and I know Katherine. But
Yeah, it's a very small community.
Human thing. And I do love that I'm seeing all these people, but thank you for giving me that brief amount of time.
Can I
go for it, Helen?
Can I just ask your background and who you are, how you fit into the community?
I was a donor. There's a podcast on Sarah Jefford's podcast about my ancestry work, and wow, I've learned so much since then. But I do genetic genealogy. I've always been interested in family trees and DNA. And then I worked out really stupidly quite recently that I have autism, which came as a shock to me. And it's because I research family trees and I look at people, and I look crazy, and I know I look crazy, but I am very passionate about people knowing who their biological family members are, because I know it has absolutely got consequences if we don't do this. So transparency is what I urge. And when I meet people, I have met donor conceived people. I am in contact with one of mine, and I attend her birthday and visit and stay at their house quite frequently. But I can tell you that the contact I've had with the industry of IVF, I would never donate again, because they changed rules, and it's rules to benefit the IVF clinics.
Yeah, I mean, this is an industry where we're, an area where we're enormously dependent on the industry doing the right thing. And I think, a couple of speakers tonight have emphasised that that doing the right thing needs to be backed up by legislation. And hopefully an active regulator. And, that is what I would like to see. And I'm not sure that we're going to see it in Victoria. But again, perhaps I'm being too hasty, and Ian will tell me if that's the case. But, I think we're hearing that national legislation, so that it's consistent across states, regulators who are active, gold standard in terms of identification, all of those things. And then, sort of regular, rigorous updating of health information, and particularly contact information as well. I think all of those things are, things that we can recommend to New South Wales that they should make sure that they are covering off on. So,
Nandi, I
um,
just wanted to touch on something I don't think we've gone into the detail of, but it's been inferred in a lot of the conversation, and that is this relationship is quite a complex one in terms of the particular people who are coming together who don't know each other. It's very emotionally laden in terms of, the connection that these people have, and people come, like Ian referred to, with different perspectives. So some people might come from a perspective that it is very, this is my biological father. The sperm donor might come at it from quite a different perspective. And, it's not like dating where if it doesn't work out with this one, you'll make contact with another one. This is, a window of time to kind of make this connection with this person and to do so in a way that's respectful of them and then respectful of you. And because it is so complex, it's something that people quite often do need quite personalised help with. The situations, like everyone has referred to, can be very, very specific to that family, to that group of people. And so to go through that process with no advice on, oh, this person's feeling a little bit nervous about that. How might I approach this conversation to be respectful of them, to maintain a relationship? That these are, I think when the survey's asking, what sort of information, we've talked about the information, and then the support. What sort of support do they need to provide? And I think, there's the general guidelines and there's also that personalised support there. And then the other point, sorry if I may, I'm just rushing because I know people, it's late at night, but the other point I just wanted to raise in terms of donor families is that the families of the donor are one of the few people involved genetically who don't have as much in some in some jurisdictions, they don't have a specific right to access the information quite often. So it's often thought of from the donor conceived person's perspective and then the donor's perspective. And often the child of the donor or the partner of the donor who has children now with this donor doesn't have a specific right to access that information, but they can be very personally affected or want to maintain or make these connections as well. And so when they ask that question, I think that's interesting that they ask, number 5, what about the donor families? Because, that's a good opportunity to point out that, well, how are they going to facilitate that? Because in the quick reading I did of the New South Wales rules, they don't specifically mention the donor's family.
That's it is
It's now
really
a good time for me to read out Nick's statement because Nick's overseas, but it's very pertinent to this section.
Sure, absolutely.
So-
Love to hear
so
more lived
Nick's-
experience.
Nick's a great guy. He was the donor at the age of 27. So there was a call out in the newspaper for donors. He's got a wife and he's got 2 children in his family. He's got 2 daughters who are aged 19 and 21. His donor conceived children range in age between 6 and 25 years old, so that's quite a spread. He's got 17 donor conceived children and he's in contact with 5 of those. Obviously I'm in contact with Nick and I think he's great. And I've asked him to specifically talk about the factors of being a donor and what that means for his family because he's a very emotionally intelligent guy. And so I'll just read out what he's written. The nature of media attention has recently focused on exposés of questionable male donors, but the vast majority are actually caring and responsible people that have aimed to help other couples and individuals in overcoming healthy gamete deficiencies. We've learnt so much as a society now that we're further down the path of ART and donor conceived people and recipient parents have been able to tell more of the lived experience. Donors too have been able to outline what it is to witness changes like the veil of anonymity being lifted, registries being established, the rise of DNA sites, and fledgling communication with offspring and recipient parents. Sometimes these new relationships turn into long-term and meaningful links, but this too is a new space. What remains in common for all quarters is that societies depend greatly on wider ART support mechanisms. This is what helps to break down stigma. This is what assists the functional extension of what the term family actually means. If you want an example of the type of dysfunction that has occurred, it is estimated that 85% of donor-conceived people offspring living in heterorecipient-based households are unaware of their true genetic makeup. This means they do not have a complete medical profile. This means they've not had the opportunity for genetic mirroring or to know their genetic siblings, and of course that of their parents' donor. It can only mean that they've been deceived by the people they should have been able to trust the most. And what counters this is strong, comprehensive and developing laws, detailed and evolving registries, public education projects, provision of counselling services, national standards that states can also aim to adhere to. Donor needs are not vastly different than other participants in seeking counselling services. Like, how do we ensure that our children, nieces and nephews aren't impacted every time they're out dating? Sometimes it's just about our partners and children overcoming the stigma and complexities of a situation they didn't themselves enter. Also, how do we establish kind, respectful and meaningful relationships with recipient parents and donor-conceived offspring? These are the targets: offspring and sibling list information, method of mutual contact, counselling services for the donor and his or her family, a simple method for health updates, and some additional questions to discuss. Should there be a mechanism for all donor-conceived people to be informed of their genetic origins, which somebody touched on before? Donor-conceived birth certificates. Do we need to ensure that there's correct DNA info on the birth certificates? And is there a role for DNA companies like Ancestry.com, which is what Emily was talking about, to make accommodations for donor-conceived people and their connections? So I think Nick touched on some really great points there that we've kind of covered, and then he's honed it down to that specific period of donation. And he obviously is an exceptional donor in terms of his emotional intelligence. And my partner and I have both been very sad that he is not the biological father of our children at some times.
Thank you for that, and it is really good to have that lived experience. I'm not sure whether people in the seminar can actually see the Q&A along the side, but I've just noted there are some more comments that have come through from Ben and from Emily Faye. Does anyone know? Does anyone on the panel know if people in
yeah, they can see the.
They can see it. Terrific. Oh, because otherwise I was going to
read
read them out for everybody's benefit. But, thank you to Ben. I can see that your comment, and Emily Faye, I have tried to scan through what you have mentioned. And I think that, yeah, absolutely, you've picked up a point about how we can capture people who are donor conceived through private donation. And that is something that, I'd love to see a national register for, and I, was trying to sort of think of ways in which that data could be captured and people could, could be, I don't want to say forced because that sounds very coercive, but in the interests of the child who is produced, that they can know. Exactly who their father is and, how many siblings they have. Because that can sometimes be a source of real distress. I think, American cases have made that very clear. There's sort of like a limit to number of siblings that you can deal with, rationally before your mind explodes because you've got 500 brothers and sisters. So I'm not going to do a wrap up because I see the time is 10:15. This is being recorded, I understand, so hopefully we'll be able to make it available, and if anyone needs it played back, they can do that on their own time, and stop and listen to Nick's letter again, because I think it was terrific. But thank you everyone for attending tonight. And I think that, if you are going to complete the survey, we've got some really good views there. You can pick and choose amongst them as to, whether you agree or whether you have perhaps another idea that you want to throw into the ring. But this is all about, once again, an opportunity to make one state's legislation lead and maybe contain more of the things. And it's a really tedious way of changing the law. We'd love to see a national reform, but sometimes we might just need to go around with the spanner and ratchet each state so that we can kind of, get the best outcomes that we can manage. There is obviously the national pathway, fertility pathway, which Greg Hunt released through the Fertility Society. We put in submissions to that, and I'm sure some of you did too. So we'd like to get moving. We've got a new government, back in, and we've got a health minister. ARTFA has been trying to make contact with him. I think we're probably going to start with contact with the department. But, we'd like to try and have a go at that. We won't stop with states. We won't stop with New South Wales and South Australia and Queensland. But it would be best, and it would be great if we could get some national action going. So that's
Nandi,
what
I'd just like to point out that the federal health minister did state just before the election, off the back of the wrong embryo case, he did say if he was re-elected to the role that he would address this at the ART regulation on a federal level. So I am hoping that we can do more of this organising and idea sharing, because he flat out stated that he would address that. Let's
hold him to his promise.
Yes, very much so. I think let's strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah, terrific. Yeah, that's really great to know. And look, in terms of wrapping up, as I say, ARTFA is an umbrella organisation. We've already started working with Rainbow Families in one state. We have recently been introduced to Melissa. So, we're hoping to do more work with egg donors, and, we know Ian from way back. But that's, the coalition of the willing. And, we'd really like to bring each other together to do that. Of course, no one is sort of saying we're only going to have one view and one voice. It's actually, we need the whole collection of voices, and we want to, to bring them together. So I think, if we can get that strength in numbers, get that strength and diversity in views and perspectives, we can really make ourselves seen. And we've got much more opportunity to influence the course of law and policy in Australia, and hopefully also the practices of the industry that surrounds us. So thank you all for your time. And please, there's so many things that you can do. You can fill out the survey, you can join some of the Facebook groups and get involved in the discussions. There's going to be more opportunities for submissions in the future. Follow people on social media, encourage those people and I, for example, know some heterosexual families who've got donor-conceived children. We constantly just gently nudging them to try and give their kids the information that they need in an age-appropriate way. But, those are all the things that we can be doing to increase our community, increase information and confidence and support for the children that we're producing. So
just one thing, sorry to interrupt. The New South Wales government is, or not the government, the consultancy agency is also holding 3 focus groups that everyone's invited to go to. They're on the links are on the website, so you can see there's one tomorrow, one on Monday evening at 8 p.m, and then one again next Friday.
Okay, so there's even immediate assistance that you can give to the New South Wales government. So, as we say, strike while the iron is hot. Thank you, Anastasia. And thank you, everyone, for attending. And I will call it, call a close to the meeting. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.